Good afternoon and welcome to Counseling Solutions, Lunch at the Round Table today, and we are going to be discussing the differences between borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder. A lot of times these two conditions are underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed because there are so many characteristics that overlap one another, to where a lot of times folks are really misdiagnosed with one or the other. So before we go any further, our usual introductions for today, starting with Miss Catherine.
Hi.
Miss Debbie.
Hello.
And Miss Tiffany.
Hi. And Miss Lynette.
All right, and so today I'm just going to give you a brief history before we go into the meat and potatoes of what each disorder is. Actually, bipolar disorder dates back pretty much to 1st century AD. And although there wasn't a name for it at the time, Greeks were studying the various differences in personalities and mood swings. They just didn't have a name for it at the time. Going forward, looking at into the 1960s, still they were honing it in and trying to figure out, put a name to the diagnosis, but they weren't really sure yet. It wasn't until roughly about the 1980s that the condition by way of bipolar disorder actually made it into the DSM-3 at that time. It was the 3rd edition as an actual diagnosis in which people could study and track and look at the various characteristics and the mood swings that accompany the disorder.
When did it change from manic depression to bipolar?
In the 1980s, when they finally were able to capture it in a snapshot what it was and cipher out everything that wasn't pertinent to the condition.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the 1980s, and that is what helped to have it published inside of the DSM-3, because then it was an actual diagnosis that could be tracked.
So prior to then, when it was still known as manic depression, it was not tracked?
It was tracked, but it was tracked improperly.
Wow.
And that's how we had a lot of people who were misdiagnosed and they were receiving medication like antidepressants that they didn't need, and it made the condition worse.
Mm-hmm.
And it caused a lot of problems, and it threw a lot of folks in the community, within the mental and behavioral health care community, for a loop, because they couldn't figure out or understand why is it we've been making these prescriptions for people and things aren't getting any better, they're getting worse. And so they went back to the drawing board and started doing more research and digging and ciphering through the stuff that really didn't pertain to the condition. And that's how we were able to have the manifestation of bipolar disorder today.
So if someone says, well, I've been diagnosed with manic depression, what do you say?
I would strongly recommend that we go and sit down and do some testing and try and isolate exactly what's going on. That's not to say that the diagnosis is wrong, but
manic depression doesn't exist anymore. It's now bipolar.
True.
Okay.
True.
Well, because manic and depressant are two aspects of bipolar. Mm-hmm. You have the mania and you have the depression. Mm-hmm. So they put the two different parts of the continuum of this disorder together and made it a manic depressant, when really it's a bipolar type of thing.
So that terminology
mm-hmm.
is antiquated. It doesn't even exist anymore.
No.
So if I had been diagnosed as manic depressive in 1970, would my records automatically change to bipolar? Probably not.
No. I'm with you on that one. No.
I would still be manic depressive.
According to those records, not you per se meaning the client, but your records, it would take the assertive efforts of the clinician to go in and verify the information that is most current.
So that a clinician would have to change that in the records. I couldn't.
No, as the client, you could not.
Okay.
No.
Another thing is that bipolar with psychosis can resemble schizophrenia. So people that probably were in a psychosis suffering with, back in the day, manic depressant would probably be diagnosed as being schizophrenic and then be locked away into a mental institution.
So another misdiagnosis.
Yes.
Retesting required.
Absolutely, and that's why those tests are so important, because initially when a person comes in, they could display a litany of things going on by way of depression, anxiety, anger, fear, rage, a whole litany of things during that initial test. and it could be attributed to grief, a divorce, or some traumatic event that has taken place in their interpersonal lives that has had an adverse effect on them emotionally. So it's good to come back at least, I would give it a good 6 months, and that's with having the therapy within that 6-month window to see if there's been a change or progress, to see where that individual is by way of condition and functioning and where they are as far as their mental stability and their emotional stability. And that's why that testing is so important, because it gives you a baseline and it also gives you a reference in which you can go forward or things that you need to come back and readdress.
So people can be situationally diagnosed with something
It just depends on the
and not actually have it?
Based on the situation.
Based on the situation, yes. I mean,
Wow.
wow. A person can go through a divorce that had never been depressed ever in their lives.
Yes.
That's a
And
very good point.
been married for 20 years or more, and then all of a sudden a significant other, they're no longer together, and it has an adverse effect on them emotionally and psychologically, and they fall into this this slump of depression, and it's only due to the situation that they're in. But the big step is coming in and talking to somebody to make sure that we can get you where it is that you want to be and need to be emotionally and psychologically.
If it's situational, then after the situation has passed, what happens to the disorder?
It's still documented because you came in, and at the time, yes, the
But it gets
situation
better.
it gets better. It can, but of course, before anything can get better, of course, it's going to get worse because then you have to address those demons that are there, so to speak.
But we have a situational depression diagnosis. Do we have a situational bipolar? Do we have a situational borderline?
No.
We don't have any other situational.
That's a good point.
Huh.
Note to self, find out why.
Yes, definitely.
Great segue into borderline personality disorders. Actually, borderline personality is kind of like the newbie to the table. It came about in the 1980s. Again, it was one of those things that was studied, but folks really didn't have a name for it until they were able to come in and hone it in and say, okay, well, here we are. This is what we have here, and it's borderline personality disorder. And it's in reference to, the borderline is in reference to the extreme entities of being one or the other. A very nice lady I know says you have your good borderlines and your bad.
That'd be me. I'm that nice lady.
Yes. And that is in reference to some borderlines have very dark personalities, and those are the ones that are really scary, and they have more of the narcissistic mannerisms about themselves by way of doing and saying some pretty horrible things and not feeling any of the empathy for the person who's ingesting that word vomit, so to speak. It's rough. And then you have the other extreme of the borderline, the good borderline, who's more emotional and intent, or in tune with everybody else's emotions and feelings, and a little bit more caring, and hence they're just a little bit more caring and a little bit more sensitive to things than everyone else, which sometimes, and most often I should say, brings about problems in relationships.
Misinterpretations, misperceptions, victimization, personalization. A lot of my ladies have that. A lot of my clients go through that on a regular.
Yeah. And I like how you said, Lynette, that it's the newbie. Because when I talk to people, somebody who's never had counseling classes, who's never been through the education for any piece of it, if they see somebody who has lots of emotions, up, down emotions, I mean, it could even be aspects of PTSD, it could be so many different diagnoses, but usually they'll say they're bipolar. It has become the layman's term catchphrase for lots of emotions. So it's also become, when I go into a doctor, I'm going to tell them I have emotions all over the place, and I'm up for days at a time, I'm anxious and these things, and they'll come to me and they'll say I've been diagnosed with bipolar. And the first thing that goes through my mind is it like does that little like bipolar or borderline slash, and we'll wait to see. Because that is so misdiagnosed when they present that, that automatically it's kind of okay, well, let's
let's see.
Indeed, it's that overlap of the characteristics that
Yes.
seem to get people in trouble, and we'll be able to really rifle through the minutiae and show people where that very distinctive difference
Yes.
between the two will come in.
Yes.
And not all physicians know the difference.
No.
That's just not within the realm of study.
Well, they just don't know that just like autism, there's a spectrum.
There's a
And there's a spectrum where you have bipolar 2, bipolar 1, borderline, and it's on a continuum. That's why it's so difficult to get that diagnosis. And what I've noticed about the treatment of bipolars versus borderlines is that bipolars respond to medication, and borderlines do not respond to medication. They have to be retaught and the skills that they need to self-regulate. And what is our society? Our society is a capitalistic society based on money. Therefore, a diagnosis of bipolar ensures medication that has to be paid for by the consumer. And instead of having a borderline diagnosis where they have to go and learn skills.
Now, also remember that we have the comorbidities with borderline.
We do.
And those comorbidities are secondary, not secondary, but they're clinical diagnoses that accompany the borderline. Borderline personality disorder is a personality disorder as opposed to the clinical disorder. So if a person has borderline personality disorder, they can also have 1, 2 more clinical disorders such as depression, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar. And those are the 4 large clinical disorders we find often go with the borderline. The clinical diagnosis, the clinical disorders are based on chemical imbalances, most often hereditary, although they can be honed by environmental factors. Borderline personality disorder, for the most part, is considered environmental, although there is research that suggests there may be a factor of genetics, heritability in there. But what Ms. Kathy's saying is absolutely true. If a person has bipolar and borderline, many times you have to get through the borderline personality disorder before you can even treat the bipolar disorder. And you're absolutely right with that, is that you have to have like several pronged comprehensive treatment plans, because you have to hit it with the therapy, the DBT you're talking about, the testing, and the medication, and the therapy. And it has to be combined. Yeah, that's quite intense.
And it's alarming because nearly 70% of the population is misdiagnosed as being bipolar.
Oh, wow.
70%.
Well, there was this huge bipolar increase, 10 years ago, something like that, where all of a sudden everybody was being diagnosed. And it wasn't the change from the manic depressant to the bipolar.
Mhm.
That's not what increased it. I guess it more likely than not had to do with, here's a new diagnosis. It already been out for a while. So the spirals, everything was just taken out of context. Our society doesn't view the bipolar in context, like you were saying. If somebody gets upset really easily, they go from here and then they're up to here. Oh, you're being bipolar. No, that's really not what bipolar is.
You know, the fact of what you said earlier about the diagnosis and what you're saying about the misdiagnosis. When we do intakes at Counseling Solutions, our clients have to fill out personal history, any diagnoses they may have been diagnosed as previously. A lot of my clients write down bipolar, and I ask them, is this a real diagnosis? Is this an authentic diagnosis? Oh, yes. And I said, well, who gave it to you? Let me have their name, their address, and so I can get your records. Oh, well, that was really my aunt. My Aunt Thelma said that I have bipolar, and I have episodes. Okay.
Yes.
So sometimes people think they're diagnosed, they're not diagnosed. Sometimes people say, well, we've always told mother she was bipolar. Well, did mother ever take meds? No.
I've actually had the opportunity to study somebody diagnosed with bipolar pretty intensely. And it was really difficult for me to look and see the spiral, because I was actually looking for the spiral. I was looking to see what it was that made bipolar. And the spiral is not as pronounced as people expect it to be. It goes into a pattern that can be month. But the mania is real. If somebody's getting 2 or 3 hours of sleep and all of a sudden they're painting everything and making all these arts and crafts and just on top of the world, and then you can see them start to go down.
And the borderline spiral looks like what? A temper tantrum.
Oh.
The borderline spiral is very similar to a 2-year-old who is throwing a fit in Walmart, except maybe this borderline is 32.
Oh.
And so someone says no. Now that's always a good way to start. No. And so then there's yelling, there's screaming, there's throwing, there's crying, escalation to to villainy, to personalizations again, accusations that are creative and no basis for any of it. And yeah, that's the borderline spiral. Borderline spirals scare people. If you're out in public and you're with a borderline and they decide to spiral, I think that's probably what most people call crazy.
That's what everybody says.
Yeah.
Bipolar.
Crazy.
You're bipolar.
No, you're borderline.
Borderline.
Yeah, borderline. Bipolar. Yeah. Bipolar spirals are mania.
Yes.
And you're right, they last for days.
It really is.
They can last for days, for hours. A borderline spiral might last, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes.
Wow.
Maybe an hour if they're really, really intense, I guess. I've never seen one go that long. They usually get exhausted and run out of fuel or pass out. They just get tired. They go take a tranquilizer and it's over.
So then what's their low look like?
What's their what?
Low.
What does the borderline low looks like? It's a depression.
Okay.
Once again, it's whatever the comorbidity is. Most of your borderlines have anxiety and depression, because anxiety is like the fraternal twin
And
of
that can look
depression.
like mania. Well,
No,
anxiety. If
maybe
you were to
that
talk about it
is
with
when
the-
you're like totally speeding.
I know, but hear me out.
Okay.
If you're talking to a doctor
Okay.
and you talk about, I'm anxious, I can't be still, and somebody's thinking about their anxiety, or they're in an anxiety,
kind of like the.
they're going through anxiety and they're taking this test. Would that not?
They're taking a test.
Yeah,
They're doing the bipolar
Mhm.
test. Okay.
the anxiety and then having the depression as well.
No.
You don't think?
No.
Okay.
Now, I would expect someone who's in a manic state. I don't want to give a specific example because of confidentiality, so I'm not going to get real specific. However, let's just say the individual had not slept for 3 days. During an hour session, the individual talked at probably about 3 to 4 times the pace we're talking now.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to take notes at first. I gave up. And the stories were, yeah, that was the story the whole time. you couldn't even follow it. There was no subject predicate. They were fragmented thoughts. No, there was no anger.
Yeah.
There was an intense pressured speech. I anticipated her painting my office. I figured she'd paint my office and scrub my floors
So
before she left.
I want to check
Extra energy.
if you were looking at the difference between the borderline and bipolar depression, wouldn't borderline have a healthy dose of guilt and shame that's attached to it, whereas you won't have likely that same amount with the borderline
With
or
the
with the bipolar
You're right.
depression.
You're right.
That would be a difference I would look for too. If there's
Right.
this complete shame, utter emptiness feeling that comes off the depression, that's a good point towards a borderline in comparison to if it's the chemical imbalance of the bipolar.
But now some of your bipolar people have borderline.
Right.
And some of your bad borderlines, mean borderlines, don't have any shame or guilt
Mhm.
because they have more of the sociopathic nature, the lack of conscience,
Right.
the narcissism.
So part of that might be is it coming out against people? Or is it like, let's say the mania is the painting the walls.
Mhm.
That's not necessarily somebody with borderline. I would expect them to get happy off of kind of getting their way.
Yes.
Not off of something that's just energy.
Yes. Yeah, not constructive, not
Yeah.
productive. Yeah. Yeah. That's a very good point. I know people who watch 4 or 5 seasons worth of Netflix at one time. They just don't sleep.
We have to be borderline.
Well, that's a mania.
Binging on Netflix.
Yes, yes.
That's clinical patient.
It doesn't always have to be clinical.
You know,
Sometimes it's just a really bad night.
I'm actually wondering if maybe in the future, some of these disorders don't end up on a continuum within each other.
Well, I think a lot of them are on the Likert scale anyway.
Oh,
where
are
you
they?
go, I think they would have
The
to be.
severity. You already
Yeah.
are supposed to mark
From
the
mild
severity
to
of the
They
DSM.
severe, but
Yeah.
like a whole continuum. I like the autism spectrum. It's like spectrum. Some of these should be spectrum together. I think it would be very helpful for clinicians to see the spectrum, to see the diagnosis in a spectrum, so that there's more likely than not a chance that they view all of the possibilities of what a person could be and where they fall.
That'd be interesting.
Another highlight, as far as the differences between borderline personality disorder and bipolar, borderline struggle with emotion regularity. They struggle terribly with it.
Don't all women struggle with emotional?
Now,
Stop stereotyping.
which often leads to
The wandering uterus.
mood swings, impulsive behaviors, constantly in a barrage of unstable relationships, one overlapping the other. I mean, it's going from one and really not having closure from the one before and going into something else that pretty much resembles what you just left, just packaged a little different from one into the other. Low self-esteem, low self-worth quite a bit with borderlines, and it often manifests into self-harming behaviors. For some reason, people have a tendency to look the other way with tattooing, but extreme tattooing with a borderline is a self-harming behavior. It takes the place of, or in lieu of, cutting or burning, but it is still just as harmful to the individual. And of course, we would start to look at suicidal ideations with borderlines. Yes.
See, if you're going through life and having traumas and doing the same thing and having more traumas and going through trauma, I mean, eventually your self-worth would decline. Eventually you would. I mean, that follows a pattern, I understand.
One of the comorbidities that goes with borderline personality disorder is abuse. It's addiction. And do you think that possible, and sometimes eating disorders go with it too.
Yes.
Do you think either of those could be considered self-harming?
I do.
Same with
Detrimental to the health. Yeah. Yeah.
Painful masochism, like the painful sexual encounters. That's another one I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
Impulsive, painful sexual encounters is another one.
I think so. NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, reports that about 1.6% of Americans have BPD. Yet it is highly probable that the percentage is much higher than that, more like 5.9. It's
I
just
agree with that.
undocumented and underdiagnosed.
I agree with that. I know that just from where I sit, just from our practice here, I find that a tremendous percentage of people, male and female, have traits, at least traits, borderline traits. Many of them have enough to fit full criteria for the DSM as a diagnosis. I think it's extremely underdiagnosed, and I think it's just my opinion that more people have the traits than those who do not.
I can see that. That same report estimated, based off of their study, that the vast majority of this populace of people, 75% of it, is women. But that's not to say that men aren't or can't be diagnosed as having borderline personality disorder, but in most instances with men, for some reason, professionals within the mental and behavioral health community steer towards depression and PTSD with men. They tend to steer away from BPD because it's so gender specific, and it shouldn't be. But that's pretty much been the snapshot that's been put out there, that, you know, with this population being mostly comprised of women and the small populace being on the very low end of the scale being men, they just tend to ignore it altogether. Again, which feeds into the underdiagnosis and misdiagnosis.
Is that maybe because of the hysteria? Because we were discussing earlier how a woman or a person that does go off on their spiral looks totally belligerent. Looks a little like hysteria. So that could it be gendered to be?
And you had said that Hippocrates, a while back, like a little while back, had actually used hysteria as a diagnosis. And Kathy was talking about the wandering uterus, that diagnosis from way back when.
That's not gender stereotype
That's
at
not
all.
at all. And Hippocrates would prescribe children to keep their uterus in one place, because we know, like we said earlier, pregnant women do not have mood swings.
No, they do not.
And being pregnant will keep a woman completely, level.
And a baseline, a functional baseline.
Absolutely.
That's not hormonal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But they only lived to be 30 back then, so I guess it doesn't matter, right?
No, life expectancy
They all
was
died
pretty short.
Yeah, that's true.
one of
30
the
years old, 14 children.
areas, there's two things I want to bring up. One is I've seen a lot of people who, when they describe their moms, a lot of times this is where the mom is described, but the dad has not been in the picture. So that's why I'm focusing more on the moms. That their mom, the way they describe them, would fit the clinical diagnosis of borderline. And then I see the child who comes out with a very unstable sense of self. Because everything feels unstable. They feel like they have grown up having to feel out what the next thing that's going to happen is, 2 days before it happens, so they can be prepared for it.
Well, the trust issues are enormous.
Yeah.
Because they learned early not to trust mommy dearest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that one is another one I see. And they come out with the same borderline traits. Some are diagnosable and some are not.
True.
But they come out with the same borderline traits, and then they're trying to figure out what happened. And it's been a coping mechanism that they used from very early on to feel out a situation that then turned negative when it was overused.
Yeah, it's an aberrant defense mechanism, borderline personality. disorder. A lot of people believe that it's just a negative coping strategy, and it was learned at an early age, like you said, from the caretaker, female caretaker. And that's how it was learned, that's how it's implemented. And I guess you just kind of fashion it to fit your own shape, your own need, as you get older. And so it does get rancid, and it does get worse. And our society feeds into it. Yeah.
It's like survival. When
That-
being brought to
yeah.
that environment,
That's
you
good.
have to learn how to survive,
Survival of the
fittest.
borderline.
Yes, well, the borderline decade, because it's that lack of structure, it's that constant ebb and flow that's so difficult to try and keep up with, to where, you do have to figure it out and navigate your own way through it in order, exactly, to make it work for you, in order for you to function at a level in which you can interact and engage.
One of the things, we know I specialize with borderlines, and I have all women. I'm just seeing all women. A lot of my women fall into that category of the good borderline, and they're totally amazing women. The intellect is off the charts, extremely intelligent women. Most of them are professional women. Most of them are business owners, leaders in the community, involved in their community. Just really amazing people who have learned some aberrant coping strategies, who are learning the right way, the productive way, socially acceptable way, effective way of dealing with these things. They just have to start over and relearn through the DBT groups that you guys run. I know that a lot of my ladies, when I ask them, why now? Why did you decide to come in at this age for therapy? Most of them have kids, and that's the reason. The reason is most of them, and a lot of my women say, there was an epiphany one day. I found myself addressing my child like my mother had addressed me. And when I heard my mother's voice and words coming out of my mouth, I was horrified. And I said, I will not have my children grow up the same way I did, because they deserve better. And these women, they work 40, 50, 60 hours a week. They're dedicated to their kids. They're still finding time to come to therapy, to come to these groups, because they want to make sure their children do not grow up having these same tendencies and behaviors, because they know the pain they've gone through, and they want it to stop. And I have such admiration for these women, because they have taken such a hard road. But that is one of the positive sides of that good borderline, is that they're pretty brave warriors.
They're resilient.
They are very resilient.
And that's one of the things that I picked up the short time that I've been here, and being exposed to borderlines, because I have been before, just didn't know. But it's their resilience, that ability to do that gut check and just keep it going, even when it's rough, but they can mask it so well and push through.
They seem to be good leaders, bossy but good.
Yeah.
And
Type A personalities.
what?
Type A
Type A, yes.
Catherine.
Sometimes fixated, sometimes obsessive, a little compulsive. But they're very, very kind.
Yes.
And they do mean well.
Yes.
And that's why sometimes they do tend to overdo, because they don't know where the appropriate stop boundary is.
Boundaries.
And boundaries is something most of them have never been raised with. And so there's so many skills that you guys teach. Do you have anyone in any of the groups here who have the borderline and bipolar diagnoses?
Not that I'm aware of. That's not to say they don't exist, but
Right, just
To
not
my-
in the groups right now.
yeah, not that I'm aware of.
What, most of your borderlines, what is their clinical diagnosis?
A lot of PTSD.
PTSD?
And depression.
And depression.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've seen individuals who have borderline symptomology and bipolar. And I've noticed something that's been actually comforting is that they are learning the skills for recognizing when the bipolar is coming on, if it's coming on. Because then they're also saying, I know that I do things on a whim, I'll quit my job, I'll leave, I'll do things, I'll run away, but I don't know that I have bipolar. They'll say, I don't know that I really have bipolar as I've been diagnosed, like clinically diagnosed with it. And so one of the comforting things for them is that a manic episode can come on without an impetus, without something activating it.
True.
And then there's a comfort in that, okay, this is still something I have to learn how to walk through and kind of plan ahead for.
True.
But it is not something I can behavior my way out of. And that one's a piece of acceptance.
Yeah.
So then it's that when we get to kind of differentiate, okay, is this something that we track it? We track it through the diary cards.
Mhm.
And we go back through and we'll see, okay, when did you get these urges to quit your job again?
Mhm.
When did you get the urges to leave? When did, and we follow it, and then it gives them this comfort that, okay, I can work on the symptomology, I can work on the skills to work through the process, and it doesn't hold near the amount of overwhelming emotions once I learn the skills for the borderline. So that's kind of one of the big comforts that I've seen as we've tracked it.
Kind of a little bit of a segue here. When you guys do your group, and let's say that you have a borderline in there who has heavy narcissistic tendencies, would you have them in that same group with the other borderlines, or would you suggest individual?
That's a tough one. I mean, narcissistic personalities are very strong personalities, very strong. And if you have a borderline in a room, or you have a table of borderlines in a room who don't have those same tendencies, and if they're in a relationship or have been in a relationship with a narcissist, I would think that would be very overshadowing to them and unsettling, because it would be too reminiscent of what it is that they've come away from or trying to get away from.
Yes.
So, me personally, with my limited, knowledge and understanding, I wouldn't put one in there. I mean, the minute it was identified, but this is something we need to talk about and start to restructure how we have things set up in that group, because I think it would be more counterproductive
Yes.
for the rest of the group members.
It would not work. Yeah. I had seen that done once before, and it was really unsettling, you're right?
Is it possible, I always wondered with studying with borderlines, do they ever fall into anniversary syndrome? Like if something traumatic happened, I don't want to say Christmas because everybody picks Christmas, but let's say,
You're talking like grief.
Yeah.
The anniversary syndrome, that grief, yes, they do.
okay.
It's talking about comorbidities. Depression, i.e. grief depression, would be a comorbidity. Could be, yeah.
Think about stuff like that. With some people, because life, does throw you a curve every now and again, and some curves a little bit harder than others.
Yeah, it does.
And it's a benchmark in a person's life.
One of the things I think we had talked about before about PTSD is that PTSD, when you break it down to its simplest form, it was something like, what was it? Trauma. I don't remember now what the formula was. I just had it in my head. It was like you had to have a traumatic event. You had to have the stressor with the traumatic event, and then you had to have some of the symptoms. But I think what we had talked about is that a traumatic event is not exactly defined other than a traumatic event. And so many of our people, being that we're in a military town, we're located, this Center is like 3 miles from the airport, Fort Hood. And our population is pretty rife with PTSD. And a lot of people seem to think that PTSD is only.
Combat related.
And we know that PTSD is anything that, any traumatic event that elicits these same behaviors. And what may be traumatic to one of us is not traumatic to the other. Lynette is starting a PTSD group actually next week. I think it starts
Wednesday
June
morning.
14th.
Wednesday at 9.
Wednesday at 9, from 9 to 10:30. And I believe it's all female.
For now, well, it's all female for now, but we're not really isolating the male population from it.
Oh, that's interesting.
No, because we already have a group that is dedicated to our female population.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right now, we have all females.
Uh-huh.
So we can hum along with that.
Okay. I know that several of the women who have already reserved places in your group, their PTSD is such a wide variety.
Yes.
And I just really wanted to reiterate and talk about your group because many of the PTSD clients we have also have BPD because like you said earlier, that's their coping strategy for the PTSD. So do you, in your group, how do you plan on working that, addressing that with PTSD and probable BPD?
Probably most clients who are coming in for BPD who already know. They're already part of a group and they're part of our BPD.
Okay.
And so we try to keep the two very isolated because we don't want one to bleed into the other.
Ooh, yeah.
It's going to be a task. We know it's going to be a
Talk about
task.
boundaries.
Yes, yes, and we'll have to set those boundaries early on. Indeed, I wanted to touch on something that you brought up a moment ago about PTSD and folks automatically assuming that it's just combat related. People who work with FEMA, natural disasters and catastrophes, are also very susceptible to PTSD. Yes. The biggest.
I said unless they have psychopathic tendencies. I'm just going to reiterate last session where there is actually a wonderful place for psychopaths.
Okay. Okay.
Off task. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but Hurricane Katrina really brought PTSD to the forefront for the people who do work natural disasters and catastrophes. I mean, it's not that they hadn't seen anything so horrific before, but it was so massive in one dose. It was quite a bit for one individual to take on at one time and still effectively do their job. So some of those folks did reach out and look for help, and it was documented that indeed it was post-traumatic stress disorder because those stressors were there. That environment, cultivated.
First responders.
Yes, that's what I was
Big
thinking.
time.
The build up over time, even though it may not be one traumatic event, it can be the build up of
Constantly going into those areas that have been impacted by something of that nature. Yeah.
Do you think that the lack of resources that was also given to Katrina could have escalated
I do. I escalated
the issues with the first responders?
Yes.
Because they were sitting in there without any resources, without any backup.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think another thing that goes with that, and I family who dealt with it, but it was something we all know with nature. Nature is so unpredictable. You watch the news. It's right here in Central Texas. You can have sun for a moment, then a thunderstorm, then hail, then God knows what else. And not being adequately prepared for what was coming. Really threw that entire population, if not the entire nation, for a loop because we hadn't seen anything like that in such an epic proportion and so many people suffering and actually seeing it. It's being televised and that empathy that came from seeing these people displaced and unfortunately seen people who you knew had passed away, and there was just nothing you could do. So for the people who work that environment and to be, immersed in that for so long, of course that's a traumatic event. Of course it's going to wear on you. So yes, I agree with you. The lack of resources and being, unprepared or ill-prepared for it. It's one of those things we would hope lessons learned going forward, from unfortunately, what happened in New Orleans and Southeast Texas, for people to really become acute and aware, hey, here's what we dealt with then.
Yeah.
Let's not make the same mistake again.
Yeah.
Let's be prepared. Let's make ourselves aware. So we do have those resources in place, and we can reach out to those folks.
And that's what therapy does.
Yes.
Therapy gives people the resources they need before they need them.
Yeah.
So that they can utilize them.
Absolutely.
Sustainability.
Yes.
There you go.
Indeed. Well, Miss Debbie, that's all I have for our segment today. I don't know about anybody else.
I'm good to go.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys later.
Till next time.
Bye.
Enjoy the weekend.
Bye.